Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily as we're calling our readings through the 1,775 poems of the Johnson edition of the collected poems of Emily Dickinson. We turn now to poem 34, Garlands for Queens May Be. Now this is another one of what some of you guys will start to call the rose poems, R-O-S-E poems, because roses are going to be referenced again. You'll remember in poem 19 she said, I am a rose. And here, this is kind of an interesting poem. We'll have a little bit of background information. But we're going to talk about the identification with the rose again in a poem like this. Now our assumptions, you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist, and that you have already studied with us for the introductory lecture as well as the last 33 poems we just finished with, If Recollecting. Now apparently, for background information, Emily sent this poem to a friend who we don't know, but clearly not a friend that she's going to call a queen. We might say someone maybe a little lesser than, some scholars have used the word humble friend, and she'll apparently have sent a rose along with it for this. So the flower of humility will be for us in this poem, the rose. So let's play the game of poem 34. By the way, only one time in all of her poetry does the word garlands and laurels get used, and it's right here. Garlands for queens may be. Laurels for rare degree of soul or sword. In other words, people who fight, you know. But remembering me, but remembering thee. Nature in chivalry, nature in charity, nature in equity, the rose ordained. Now, it's an interesting little poem. And I find it interesting that it starts with ideas of garlands and laurels and ends with the rose. Also, I'm interested in the use of her word ordained, and we'll get to it in a moment. Notice she'll say, queens deserve garlands, and those who are great and mighty warriors deserve laurels. And of course, we're familiar with the laurel tree and the whole story of Apollo and Daphne. We've talked about it at learnstrong.net, and the idea that, of course, the greatest, Dante himself, of course, sometimes pictured with the laurel, all of that for those who are of rare degree. But then her use of and this will take us back to poem, or take us to a number of poems where she uses this formulation. Poem 240, Moon and Star, poem 177, Necromancer Suite, at poem 666, Tenerife, and we'll hear this it's like a like that, you know, kind of, but, oh, by the way, that kind of thing. But remembering me, but remembering thee. And think about the way in which so much of Emily's poetry is about trying to remember. And I think that's significant. And then we get our Trinity. Nature in chivalry. We'll come across this when we do poem 1224. At poem 1224, her use of the word chivalry, like trains of cars on tracks of plush, I hear the level be, ajar across the flowers goes, their velvet masonry withstands until the sweet assault their chivalry consumes. So we're going to see that. Her use of the word charity we'll see again when we hit poem 376, and she'll say it this way, of course I prayed, and did God care? He cared so much as on the air a bird had stamped her foot and cried, give me my reason, life I had not had but for yourself. 'Twere better charity to leave me in the Adam's tomb, merry and naught and gay and numb, than this smart misery, this use of the word charity. Equity we'll hear when we hit poem 1167. Not so in equity will be her reference there. And then finally at poem 1375 as well, we'll hear this game being played with this equity. Death warrants are supposed to be an engineering of equity. So we'll come back to more of her use of that. Nature in chivalry, nature in charity, nature in equity, the rose ordained. And we're going to see the rose in the next poem, in poem 35. Nobody knows this little rose. And we've already seen in poem 19, I'm a rose. The use of the word ordained will take us to poem 405, ordained to suffering. The idea that the rose is the perfect flower for Emily of something other than a queen, something other than a person worthy of garlands. And what would that be? And laurels. And what would that be? That would be maybe the normal person. You'll remember that she said it, I'm nobody, who are you, in poem 238. We'll get there to hear that one. At 2a, I think her argument is that the most important people in our lives are the ones that are not the queens, that are the humble, that are, can we say it, the nobodies. Again, poem 288, I'm nobody, who are you. At 2b, obviously the symbolism of the rose. I love her trinities. I love that, as we said, some of those words like garland and laurels only used in this poem. At 3a, well, you can think about Burns as a red, red rose, and we've given a lecture at learnstrong.net on this one. 1794 was when Burns wrote that famous song about the rose. Certainly, no question, Emily knew this poem, and her use of the rose always seems to kind of harken back to the Romantics and to Burns. Finally, at 3b, well, what about flowers as a symbol, and especially a symbol for you? Does the rose work? Do you think of the rose as a symbol of humility? You'll remember that T.S. Eliot in Burt Norton, in that famous rose garden, will say that the roses have the look of flowers that are looked at, and to that degree, does the rose actually represent for you a symbol of the normal, of the nobody, of humility? And what flower would you choose if it's not the rose to reference you? Thank you.